Good day, my name is Melinda Coffey and I am the tutor for Adolescent Literature and Reading Support for Year 3, Term 2. As you will see on the screen, my name is there, my cell phone number is there, and also the contact times. And you are more than welcome to contact me if you have any questions or there may be something that you don't understand about the work, then you can call. You can also SMS or WhatsApp, and you can even ask for my email address, and then you can email me if you have questions. Just a few general notes is that in order for you to really understand the work that is in the study guide, you're going to have to go through the entire study guide, make sure that you check in specifically on the learning outcomes, any of the learning activities that's in the study guide, because those are nice questions to work out, and it already gives you an idea of the way that questions are asked and the things that you should be focusing on. Okay, this presentation is not specific questions for you to prepare for the exams or for the assignment. It is more of a guideline to help you to see the type of work that is there, and I will also explain to you more or less how questions can be asked and how you should then answer those, like what can you focus on. So for the assignments and for the examination, it is important that you read through all of the questions that you are asked and make sure whether it says, especially in the exams, it says if it's compulsory or if there's perhaps a choice question. And then also it's important to, when you read the question, to look at the verbs that is being used. That verb will tell you more about how much you are expected to write, and it will tell you more about what is expected of you in relation to also the marks that is there. So for instance, if the question has the verb you must just list, then you can just list. But if the question has a different verb, a describe or a discuss, or even maybe argue or propose, then you'll have to fill in a bit more detail than just putting it bullet point. You'll have to write, for instance, a paragraph in which you then explain a bit more about the answer. Okay, so it's important also if you are handing in assignments where you have written, and also then in the examination, to write neatly and legibly so that it is easy to mark, because otherwise if I or whoever marks cannot understand what you have written, then we cannot give marks for that. Okay, so we're going to just jump right into the work. With the first one, the first part is about the reading process for adolescents and children. So the reading process, you'll see it consists out of 5 stages. So this is, when we say it's a process, it means that a child will start at stage 1 or step 1, and so they will progress until they reach the end. So in a case like this, questions can be, for instance, that you just have to name the stages, but there also can be where you have to discuss the stages. So in cases like that, don't just name them, but also know exactly what that stage is about. Maybe, for instance, things that the child needs to be able to do before they go then on to step 2. And also, what impact will it have if they have not maybe done stage 1 or stage 2? Like, will that have an effect then on the stages that are still to come? Will they be able to perform it or not? Okay, the next 2 slides is about the reading process. It's a complex developmental process. So process, once again, like I said, it refers to certain steps and things that need to be in place in order to reach your end goal. So it's a developmental process because children start at the beginning when they are still small, and as they are exposed to more and more reading material and seeing people around them reading, listening to people speaking and telling stories, that is how they then go through the process of learning more about what it is like to read, how to do it, So everything that has an impact on children learning to read in the form then of the process. So you saw at the previous slide the different stages that there are. Now it is, how do they all fit in together in the lifespan of a child as they grow up? So when it comes to answering questions about this, you will have to describe or discuss what is meant, for instance, if we say that reading is a complex developmental process, and not just saying that reading takes place throughout the child's life, but explaining why do we also call it a developmental process instead of just saying it's a process that children go through. Okay. So there's different things that have an impact, the way that children are then exposed to reading. It's a cognitive process, it's a social process, there's abilities that's involved. So you need to have a broad understanding of what this complex developmental process is about. Then there are, in this study guide, there's 3 different theories about the reading process. So when it comes to theories, everybody has a different theory as to how this reading process develops. So do children first have to maybe understand the separate parts, like do they first need to know phonemes and vocabulary in order for them to then be able to get to a fluent stage of reading? So some theories will believe that it is everything has to be in place and then the child can read. Other theories say that a child will be able to read whether they can break it down into the small parts or not. So it's more about the reading piece as a whole. So when it comes to these theories and models, it's important for you to know each theory as a theory on its own, but at the end of the day also to be able to compare 2 of the theories with each other. So if we have the bottom-up reading theory, you need to know what it is all about. And you have to, when we say describe, so you describe how does it say the reading development process takes place. And then if we have the top-down theory, the same again, you need to say what it is about. But then you also might have to, for instance, compare these 2. So when you compare something, try not to just list all the attributes of, for instance, first just the bottom up and then the top down, but actually compare 2 of the things with each other. So if we go back, if you say that the bottom up theory of reading believes that before a child can read, they need to have developed print awareness first, you need to go to your top down theory and you need to say, what does this theory say compared to what did the bottom up theory say? Then you have also your interactive reading model. So that's the third either theory or model that's present. Then we have things that good readers do. That is also, there's a very long list of things that good readers will do. And in cases like these, you might be asked to either state the different things that good readers do or list. And then if it's a state or a list question, you can just, as they are here, you can put them. But if a question asks you to discuss or explain or describe something, try to focus more on putting that in a paragraph form with nice complete sentences. Okay, so here's more things that good readers do. Take note at the bottom where it says good readers also have before, during, and after reading strategies. So these are the strategies that learners use before they read. There might be things that they get into place before they actually start reading. Then there's things that they do during reading. So for instance, they will highlight parts or they will make notes. They will try to get questions for themselves to make sure that they are comprehending what they are reading. And then there's also the after reading activities. So this is where they now answer the questions or they have group discussions. So you also need to know some of those strategies, not just the things that good readers do, but also their before, during, and after strategies. Struggling adolescents have a few different characteristics. These on the screen that you see, these are just a few. In the study guide, there's actually quite a long list. So this is also something that you do not need to know every single one of them because the list is quite long. But it's important that you are able to list or to name or to describe some of the characteristics that learners will display if they are struggling to read. Then we have different factors that influence whether a child learns or how they learn to read. So there's 6 main factors. These factors are the parent factor with adolescent literature, the income factor, the community factor, early learning factor, and then the teacher factor. So for each of these factors, you need to be able to say, if we're talking about the parent factor, what impact or influence do parents have on a child's learning ability when it comes to learning how to read? So, for instance, if we say that if the parent themselves display also that they enjoy reading, that it is something that is done in the house, it will have an impact on the child also being interested in learning to read. So for each of these, you need to be able to know when we say this, what is the actual impact that it has on how a child learns to read. There are various different ways then also to create a reading culture in school. And when it comes to questions about the reading culture in school, note how the question is asked. Whether it asks is just that you describe or name or list how to create a reading culture, or whether it focuses specifically on, for instance, how a teacher can create a reading culture. And then you need to select from this long list of how a reading culture can be created. Select things that you feel in your opinion is things that a teacher can do so that he or she creates a reading culture either within school or within the classroom itself. Okay, so there's quite a few of them. And then we have 7 basic themes in adolescent literature. And these themes, you should be able to name them or list them. You should be able to say a little bit more about what they are. So if we say slaying the monster, what theme is that? What does it center around? Motivating adolescent learners to read goes over the next 2 slides. So if we look at this part, you will be able to explain, for instance, why is it important that we need to motivate our adolescent learners to read. So in that part, you can go through it in your study guide and you will then draw a conclusion as to why is it necessary to do that. So when you are going through the information, don't just read it as it is and just try to learn all of that stands there, but also think to yourself about the types of possible questions that can come out of a piece like this. For instance, is it necessary for us to motivate our learners to read? How can it be done? Then there's also specific tips for motivating learners to read. The list is quite a long list once again, and you can go through a few. Make sure that you know quite a few of them, not just 1 or 2 tips, but a few of them, and be able to put them not just in a point like it is here in a bullet point, but be able to put it in a paragraph, so make it a full sentence. There's more tips for motivating learners to read as well. And then we move on to the types of reading, and each of these types of reading have a specific purpose. So if we have intensive reading, you have a description about what it is, but it's important that you also read through for what kind of purpose will a person or a school-going learner, why will they use that specific type of reading? And then you need to be able to describe it. So what is intensive reading? What is extensive reading? What is skimming? What is scanning? But also be able to compare two of them with each other, for instance. So if we have, what is the difference between skimming and scanning? Because both is quite a brief look over the piece that you have, but they have different purposes for which they then can be used. Then there's different genres of adolescent literature. There's, once again, quite a few of them. It is important, though, that you do not just know that to list them, but also know what does it mean. So if we say adventure literature, what is adventure literature? What kind of stories is it? You need to be able to say, is there perhaps a specific book that falls within that genre? The next section is all about the role that literature plays within various developing areas of children. So it's their moral values, it's their gender identity, it's awareness of the self. And with each of these areas, it's important that you need to be able to discuss the role that it has on the learner's development, but also not just discuss and explain it, but also whether it has an impact. So you should be able to conclude from the information, does it have an impact in your opinion? So for instance, if the question is asked to critically discuss, that critically discuss means that it requires a bit more from you when you answer the question. You need to be able to draw a conclusion. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. In what way does it do that? Okay, so when it comes to with the role that literature plays in developing moral values, you can see that usually learners, when they are reading a book, children, as they read it, there's specific moral values that come forth within the stories, that these learners and readers then, they live themselves into the story. So here is where they learn more about what kind of moral values are good, what things are not so good, and then they can then apply that to their own lives as well. So when it comes time for them to make moral decisions, they already have been introduced in the world of literature to how will the different characters react, and can I react the same way? Is it something I can then implement in my own life as well, with moral dilemmas that I'm facing? Okay, so it gives stories, really novel stories, it gives children the window into the different moral values that their character struggles with. And it tells them a little bit more about also your character as an individual, how the way that you react to specific things, how that reflects on your character as a person. Then the impact that it has on a child's gender or their gender identity basically, is that in books usually children are exposed to how specific genders are assigned specific tasks or gender roles that is there. So depending on the kind of novels that they are reading, they will either be introduced to, for instance, that girls only do this and that, and then boys do the opposite. Like girls need to be soft and they don't do adventurous things, and boys have to, slay the dragon and they have to go out on adventures. And so depending on the kind of the way that gender is depicted in novels, this is then the identity that children will have. They will have this view of what is it like to be a girl and what is it like to be a boy? What is expected of me? So it's not always that this is the correct information, because often in books you have gender stereotypes, and that is where it says that girls are a certain way and can only do certain things, and then boys are this way and can only do those things. So there's these stereotypes that are linked to the different genders. And it is important that children are made aware of that also when it comes to when you use this literature then in the classroom. So when it comes to the media as well, this is also where children see it. So it's the types of messages that is displayed about what is expected of boys and girls and men and women at the end of the day. And then there's also suggestions to avoid the gender bias in literature. So this is like to not create those gender stereotypes. There's the specific things that the teacher can also do. So you will see here, for instance, when it comes to occupations and activities, it says that it should be presented as accessible to both genders. So that is one of the things. So you need to be able to not just list these, but also describe them and explain them. So if we say occupation and activities should be presented as accessible to both genders, you need to say a bit more about that, about what it means. That it means it shouldn't just say, for instance, books shouldn't just focus on boys will become scientists and astronauts and engineers, but that a girl or a woman can, at the end of the day, can also become an astronaut or an engineer. So for both genders, a book should be selected that has that doesn't actually have gender bias, where it says the specific roles only go to specific genders. Okay, so here then it's how it affects then or promotes an understanding of the self. So once again, you need to be able to describe and discuss how adolescent literature promotes within learners the ability to understand themselves better as well. So our young children are constantly, they are searching for their identity, a description of who they are. And some of this can also then be found in literature, is what they turn to, because they are exposed to a lot of reading, especially when they are in school. So it's important to take note of this literature that they are reading. What kind of an identity is it promoting within the reader? So will they be able to see a sort of a reflection or a representation of themselves within the pages? Okay. So it has, literature has the ability to tell the readers the truth, however disagreeable it may be sometimes, but it equips them with dealing with realities of what it is like when you grow up also, and what is like growing up. So it depends on the kind of literature they are reading, whether it is a story about someone within their own age group, or is it a story about more adolescents. So that will give them an idea of either now how to handle it, or then if they grow up, how to handle that. So it's important that they read literature that spans over more than just a small part, because this is the way that they are going to create their identity. And this is not just for now, but for the future. Okay, so reading multicultural literature can also benefit teenagers, because you do not just want the adolescents, when they are reading something, not just to know only about their own culture and their own way of doing things, but also to learn more about different cultures. It gives them an understanding of how people in different cultures do things their way. And so it broadens their worldview more than just their own little circle in which they are traveling. So it helps them to understand, for instance, that society has a value system that validates some differences and minimizes others. And this system is based on ignorance and misperception, and its existence promotes inequality. So that is something, that is the last point here on the slide, that is something that they will also realize through reading. So it benefits the teenager in that they can learn something from it. Okay, there's the list continues of the benefits that having multicultural literature has for teenagers as well. And then these are the requirements to look at when selecting work for adolescent literature. So this is when a teacher needs to go and select a book that she or he wants the class to read, or that he or she will read to the class. This is the requirements that can be followed as to how do I select that book. So there's a whole lot of things to look at. The author, whether it has a good vocabulary, whether it will expand a learner's vocabulary. So not just to be on a lower vocabulary level, they also need to learn more. So it needs to be on a good quality book as well. And then will it have the different types of literature that you're going to choose? Is it different from different genres? Is it from different eras? For instance, something that is a little bit older and then something that's a little bit younger as well, more relative to now. And then different authors as well. Not just to stick to one specific author, but different authors, because each author has their own writing style and uses different way of vocabulary, so it exposes learners to more than just one way of doing things. Okay. Then there's a section that says learners should be prepared for the reading process through the use of reading readiness activities. And then there's a few reading readiness activities, but these are also visual processing skills. So the question you will either find the words, how learners can be prepared through reading readiness activity, or the question will say how the learners can be prepared using visual processing skills. So maybe name or describe the visual processing skills that is needed for a learner to be able to read. And then with each of these, you have your visual perception activities, visual discrimination, form constancy, visual memory, sequential memory, visual spatial relation, and figure ground. But as it says at the bottom, within each of these reading readiness activities or skills, they each have their own activities. So that's why it says reading readiness activities. So for instance, if we say visual perception activities, you need to go and look what are some of the activities that a learner should be able to do so that it improves their visual perception. Okay. And then what is multimodal text? So you need to be able to explain what is multimodal text. You need to define it, explain it, and then also you need to be able to say, why would you use multimodal text within a classroom? So why would a teacher make use of it? Is there a benefit for the learners? So for instance, it says that because there's so many different technologies that are coming out, it needs to be integrated within the classroom already, because not all learners have access to different multi-modes out there. So some learners will have access to computers and tablets and cell phones, so the internet and television and radio, for instance, and then other learners might not be exposed to all of that within their household. So bringing it to the classroom is a way of exposing your learners to more than one way, more than just a textbook in front of them, because that's just one visual form that reading can take place in and writing. But there's lots of different ways. So that's, for instance, one reason why multimodal text can be used in a classroom. Then we have reading skills that a teacher can apply when reading aloud to learners. You have rate, so that is the speed at which the reading is taking place. You have your tone, so whether it is a tone that is a very boring tone, like for instance, you only speak at one specific tone. There's no up and down in your voice. Then you have pitch, so is the person reading in a high pitch or in a low pitch? And then you have volume, whether it is read at a nice loud volume so that the learners can hear it, or whether when the reading is done too soft and learners cannot hear, they will get distracted. So there's also expression. So if reading a story, if the character in the book is shouting something, is the teacher or the learner, are they also reading in that way, as if the character is shouting something, or are they just sticking to one way of reading it? And then, of course, the different character voices. When different characters speak in a book, does everybody speak the same, or is the reader actually giving different voices to each of the different characters? So you need to be able to then also discuss or describe these. So although on this slide it is just listed, you need to be able to also explain what each of these mean, and not just be able to list them as it is here. The focus of reading instruction for early readers is different, so it versus the focus of reading instruction for adolescent readers. When it comes to early readers, you have the things that they need to be able to do is they need to have phonemic awareness, they need to know phonics, they need to read fluently, they have to have their vocabulary, and they need to have comprehension, so understand what they are reading. But when it comes to adolescent readers, during early reading, they've already mastered those 5. Now when they're adolescents, the game is it's upped a bit, so it's a bit more difficult, and you get word study, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and motivation. So now these things play a role in the reading instruction of your adolescent readers. Now these 5 things, from word study to motivation, is known as the 5-point program. So for instance, if a question asks that you should name or explain or list the 5-point program, then this is what the question is asking for. There are some activities that can help readers who are struggling to read. So there's a long list on the screen. You need to be able to give the name of let's say you have first break the ice, so that's the name of the activity. But you also need to be able to describe what it is about. So when we say first break the ice, what kind of an icebreaker is it? What is the actual activity? And then, so how does it help a learner who is struggling to read? So it is an activity, and then you describe it, and then you say, through doing this activity, how will it help the reader? Then we have our 2 ways in which comprehension skills can be enhanced. So you have the question-answer relationship technique, where questions are asked and it needs to be answered. Or you have pair rehearsal. So this is where learners have a piece of text, so a paragraph or a storybook, a short piece, and then they need to read it to each other, but using the correct tone and character voices and expressions. So they are basically helping each other. And in this way, it also enhances their comprehension skills. So allowing struggling readers to choose their own book is a way of motivating them. So there's 7 specific benefits. When it comes to these benefits, the questions, you will either list benefits of allowing struggling readers to choose their own book, or for instance, you would have to discuss is it a benefit to learners? So if you allow a struggling reader to choose their own book, will that act benefit the reader? Will it help them, and will it make it easier for them? So when it comes to discussing or explaining it, you say whether it does or it doesn't, and then also the question can also be something like, for instance, that you critically discuss it or that you argue the fact. And when it comes to things like that, you need to make a choice based on what you have read. These 7 points that's here. You need to make the choice. Do you now agree or do you disagree that it has a benefit for the readers? Then we have our strategies that learners should be taught to be independent readers. So ultimately, children should be able to read on their own in a fluent way and comprehending still what they are reading. And these are the specific strategies that a learner can then be taught so that they become an independent reader. And this you need to be able to list and also say what it is about. Improving reading retention in struggling adolescent readers. So there's 6 different ways. First, learners need to learn how to comprehend and to retain the information through explicit and varied teaching. But then there's also different comprehension strategies. So the strategies is questioning, vocabulary instruction, monitoring, summarizing, focus and attention, and then also motivation. So you need to be able to say, questioning, how does that questioning, that strategy that they are using, how does it help them with comprehension? When it comes to summarizing, how does making summaries help a child to work on their retention? How does motivation help a child with retention of what they have read? So you need to apply each of these to how it will then improve the retention, the reading retention of a child. When it comes to creating a reading corner in a class, it's important that you read through this, but that you then can say, how can a reading corner be created? So it's not just about what you see here in front of you, but also thinking about a reading corner, a really comfortable reading corner. What is in one of those? If you had to choose a spot where you can comfortably sit and read in a classroom, what are the things that you would want to see around you? Does there need to be a carpet, pillows, a chair, bookshelves? So although the information is here in your study guide, you can also let your imagination go a little bit and think to yourself, if this was me sitting in a classroom, what would I want around me to have a comfortable reading experience? Then we have the features of an effective reading program. So these features, you should be able to list them. For instance, careful use of teaching time, reading opportunities, classroom discussions. So these are all the things that a person is looking for to know that you have had an effective reading program. Then there's advantages of using e-books compared to using conventional books. So e-books is basically the books on the tablet, so they can be ordered. You don't have to go out and then you buy the actual book. And this is the advantages of using an e-book compared to going to the library and actually taking out a book. So you need to be able to list and name these specific advantages. Okay, the purpose of an assessment. There's 3 different purposes why a teacher will use an assessment. It's information to the learner, it's information to the parent, but it's also to evaluate the teaching or the learning process. So is the process that we are following as a teacher, is it working? Is it doing the job that it needs to? So this is the purpose of the assessment. Then you also have the 3 different types of assessment, which is formative, continuous, and summative. So formative is the observations and information that is collected basically, and it helps to just shape and direct teaching, so that you know more or less what is working and what is not working, whether the method of teaching must be adjusted. And then continuous assessment, so it's throughout the year, it's not just a once-off process. And summative assessment is that at the end of the school year, everything gets put together in a summary to see what has happened. And then you have your 3 methods of assessment, which is informal and formal, and then criterion referenced assessment. So with each of these 3, whether it is the types, whether it's the purpose of assessment or the method of assessment, you should know the name and you should be able to describe or explain what it is about. Then there's common reading problems found in Namibia, or it can also be common areas of reading difficulties. So you need to look carefully at the question, whether it is asked reading problems or whether it's reading difficulties. Those two are actually the same thing, and it refers to this specific information. So it's the different areas and problems that's found, for instance, that a child is incorrect in approach, they have an incorrect approach to reading. So they are not processing the print phonetically. They are approaching it in a different way as to what they were taught. For instance, they can also have gaps in direct knowledge of the complete phonemic code. So they do not know everything, and that then makes it difficult for them to get into the process of reading. Then we have standardized tests. So here you need to know what is a standardized test, but it's important that you also know the names of the 3 most common standardized tests and also be able to say what it is about. So if you say achievement test, what is an achievement test? If you say psychological test, what is a psychological test? Then we have the different types of learner support that can be given for different reading difficulties. Here you need to be able to list them. You need to be able to also discuss or describe them. So explain what it is all about, where it will be used, what it works best for. And then we have different ways to increase a struggling reader's self-esteem. You'll see there's 2 slides of different ways that self-esteem can be improved. So tips to increase the struggling reader's self-esteem. And this can be, when you read through it, read what is maybe applicable. Like, is there something specific that a teacher can do? Is there something specific that you think the parent can do? Or is it just in general tips to improve the self-esteem? And then we have literature circles. So you need to be able to say what is a literature circle, so define the term. And you also need to say, give the 4 reasons for why would we use literature circles in a classroom as a way of maybe doing a book report. So there are 4 reasons, and you need to be able to clearly explain the reasons that a teacher will use it. And that then brings us to the end of our presentation. And I wish you all the best for your examination and for your assignment. And as I said in the beginning, feel free to contact me if you have any questions or if there's something that you don't understand. Thank you very much.